On December 11th, Japanese Prime Minister Junichiro Koizumi met with Thai Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra, Malaysian Prime Minister Abdullah Ahmad Badal, and President of the Philippines, Ms. Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, separately while they were in Tokyo to attend the Japan-ASEAN Special Summit. He then agreed with the leaders to start respective bilateral talks to sign free trade agreements. Ms. Yanai, what is the significance of the agreement to start FTA talks between Japan and the three ASEAN nations?
Japan and the ASEAN countries as a whole have already agreed to start talks on the Comprehensive Economic Partnership, the so-called Japan-ASEAN CEP. Besides this pact talk, why did Japan announce the launch of government-level negotiations on bilateral free trade agreements with three major ASEAN members, respectively? One of the aims is to demonstrate the strong political will to maintain the promotion of trade liberalization inside and outside the country. Japan's FTA talks with Mexico have failed to reach an agreement in October due to an agricultural sector problem. This collapse disappointed the Japanese business community. Even though no deadlines were set in the statements issued after the meetings with three ASEAN members, Japan signaled implicitly that it hopes to reach agreements within a year. The announcement of the launch of the bilateral FTA talks sends to the domestic industries and farmers the message of keeping FTA talks active. Moreover, Japan is concerned about the growing influence of China in Asia, especially since 2002, when Beijing signed a pact that sets a framework for talks on free trade agreements with the 10-member ASEAN. Amid such worries about falling behind in Asia, last week's talks between Japan and the ASEAN countries are being widely seen as Japan is seeking to counter China's exerting influence. There are also some implications for ASEAN countries. First, the negotiations with Japan are seen widely as leverage that can be used as an advantage in their negotiations with China. Second, three ASEAN countries could show they are equal partners with Japan. An FTA obliges all parties to liberalize reciprocally. That means participants in negotiations are regarded as equal partners. As to this point, Prime Minister Thaksin expressed the idea that to launch formal talks is representative of the development of a relation between the aid and the aiding to that of two equal partners.
So far, Japan has concluded an FTA with Singapore, and it will enter FTA negotiations with Thailand, Malaysia, and the Philippines with the Japan-ASEAN Special Summit as a start. It's also expected that Japan will begin similar talks with Indonesia before long. If Tokyo succeeds in entering into FTAs with all these countries, it will ensure strong economic cooperation with the ASEAN in practical terms. However, it said that the negotiations may experience a number of difficulties. What are the major obstacles to Japan signing of free trade agreements with the three ASEAN nations?
The talks could proceed with difficulty because of Japan's highly protective farming, forestry, and fisheries industries, as well as its reluctance to allow nurses and other foreign workers to work in Japan. These are the key sectors where the three countries, specifically the Philippines and Thailand, demand Japan's acceptance. Japan's only free trade deal to date is with Singapore. The one reason why Japan could form an FTA with Singapore is that trade liberalization actually excludes for Japan's heavily protective farming sector. In addition to this agricultural problem, this is another key hurdle in ASEAN FTA negotiations. That is the systemic issue of decision-making in Japanese government. The coverage of the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, toward which Japan aims, will include various fields such as investment liberalization, intellectual property rights, and deregulation of the labor market. In the negotiations regarding traditional FTAs, which treat only tariff reduction, principal ministries participating in negotiations are only the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, MOFA, the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, the METI, and the Ministry of Agriculture. However, under CEP negotiations, many other ministries come to participate in the negotiations, and there are jurisdiction problems between them. So consensus building between various sectors of the Japanese government is problematic under the current bureaucratic system.
Preceding its efforts to conclude FTAs with ASEAN nations, Japan began its attempts to sign a similar accord with Mexico, but negotiations have come to a standstill over the liberalization of such farm products as pork and oranges. It seems virtually impossible for the two countries to reach a consensus by the end of the year. It's been suggested for years that the Japanese government devise a comprehensive trade strategy that would better complement domestic industrial policies while looking ahead for 5 years or even 10 years. Ms. Yanai, what kind of strategies does Japan need for FTA negotiations?
In order to promote FTAs, it is necessary for Japan to integrate its policies, including its trade policy, domestic production policy, labor policy, and immigration policy. It is widely said that the delay of structural reform becomes an impediment to trade liberalization. In other words, problems behind the border become problems at the border. It is necessary for all participants to seriously consider and act upon economic reform individually for an FTA to make sense at all. Second, Japanese bilateral FTA policy must be consistent with regional or multilateral trade policy. A Japanese Foreign Ministry official says that 3 sets of talks on bilateral free trade deals are essential to progress on an ASEAN CEP, which is a pact with ASEAN as a whole. Moreover, these bilateral talks are regarded as a first step towards forming the East Asian Community, which was proposed by Prime Minister Koizumi in 2002, and is aiming at promoting closer cooperation between ASEAN countries and Japan, China, South Korea, New Zealand, and Australia. If that is true, bilateral pacts with ASEAN countries could result in the establishment of an East Asian community. However, in theory, the networks of bilateral FTAs do not necessarily lead to wider and deeper regional or multilateral liberalization. Rather, there is a risk that a variety of bilateral FTAs could undermine regional unity by the so-called spaghetti ball effect. In order to avoid the above, Japan has to keep a consistent trade policy with Asian countries.
The Association of Southeast Asian Nations launched FTA talks with China ahead of Japan, It said that the ASEAN and China are aiming to liberalize the trade of what are known as materials by 2010. In the meantime, it's thought that Japan will face more difficulties in similar negotiations because the ASEAN nations demand the opening of investment and labor markets, in addition to lifting tariffs. Japan and the ASEAN aim to realize a comprehensive economic partnership agreement, including the elements of a free trade area, by the year 2012. Ms. Yanai, what is ASEAN's biggest demand on Japan in terms of FTAs?
It is natural that tariff reduction becomes one of the main issues of FTA talks. Also, different countries concerned have different items that they want to increase export to Japan. For example, Thailand displays its desire to export greater quantities of agricultural products such as rice, sugar, and chicken meat. The Philippines, tropical fruits such as bananas and pineapples. And for Malaysia, forest products, palm oil, and chipboard. In addition to these tariff reductions, the ASEAN countries are strongly calling on Tokyo to deregulate on foreign workers' markets in order to allow more professionals, especially nurses and other caregivers, work in Japan. Interestingly enough, the FTA talks between ASEAN and China deal with mainly liberalization of goods, and ASEAN countries don't demand to open a Chinese labor market. FTA talks between the three ASEAN countries and Japan include not only labor markets, but also investments, services, trade facilitation issues, and so on. Such comprehensiveness of the negotiations displays the closer ties between ASEAN and Japan. We could say that relations between the ASEAN countries and Japan are attempting to enter into the second phase, promoting free mobility of capital and labor, from the first phase, activating just only the trade of goods.
Japan is behind with free trade agreements with ASEAN. For example, China and India have already entered FTA talks with this association. Japan will devote its energy to catching up with these and other countries and bringing FTA negotiations with ASEAN to a settlement in 2004. Finally, Ms. Yanai, how do you view the future process of FTA negotiations between Japan and ASEAN?
The Japanese government aims at reaching agreements within the year of 2004. However, nobody knows how the negotiations will proceed over the next year. For example, it is almost impossible for Japan to finalize an FTA negotiation with Mexico by the end of this month, which is the target end date. Tough negotiations will be expected in ASEAN FTA talks as well. One indication encouraging FTA talks is that the Ministry of Agriculture shows signs of changing its attitude from desperately defending Japanese agriculture against liberalization to a forward-looking approach toward FTAs.
Ms. Yanai, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
That was Ms. Akiko Yanai, researcher at the Institute of Developing Economies, interviewed by Emily Cooper on the problems of free trade agreements and economic cooperation.